there, this is Joey, back again with another marvelous video. Sin Eater Origins Explored. Spider-Man has always been a beloved character that has brought wonder to the minds of young kids and adults all over the world for years. But what makes the character so special are the antagonists that trouble him. Villains such as the Lizard, Kraven, Mysterio, Vulture, and many others make Spider-Man the hero he is today. Spider-Man would not be such an accomplished character if the villains he fought and put behind bars were not as impressive as the wall-crawling superhero himself. The Sin Eater is a villain of Spider-Man who had a few fantastic stories back in the day and now has been brought back from the grave by Nick Spencer in his amazing Spider-Man comic book series, specifically the Sinister War comic book storyline. So let us take a look at one of the most underrated villains that Spider-Man has ever fought. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Stanley Carter, aka Sin Eater Origins Explored. The son, born out of a relationship between a man from the countryside and a woman from the upper side of New York, Stanley Carter never knew his parents during his childhood. His parents were drug addicts, as most people were in New York City during that time. His father died due to his repeated abuse of drugs. Stanley Carter's mother was left pregnant with him, but her family got her into rehab and sent Stanley Carter to be raised by his grandfather, who lived deep in the Ozark Mountains. His grandfather was a piece of work. He was a zealous pastor who preached to the superstitious members of his church every Sunday. His grandfather despised his son, Stanley's father, for being soft and weak by running away. He decided to take it all out on his grandson by making him tough. Stanley was forced to hunt deer and other animals to prove he was not soft, but it all changed the day Stanley's grandfather died because of a venomous snake bite. His congregation was baffled that the Holy Spirit did not protect their spiritual leader. They came to the conclusion that Stanley's grandfather would not ascend to him because of the sins he carried, so a Sin Eater ritual had to be done. The congregation kept the body of Stanley's grandfather out on a picnic table with the meal spread out on top of him. The idea was that the Sin Eaters would come out at night and eat the meal, which meant that they would take on the sins of the person. The congregation locked themselves up for the night, but Stanley stayed near his grandfather's body because of his burning desire to know what would happen. A Sin Eater emerged from the woods and started eating the fruits placed upon the dead body. Stanley felt a strange kinship with the Sin Eater, as he believed to be carrying his father's sins. He felt as if the Sin Eater marked him. Stanley thought that he had a higher calling. Soon after, his mother showed up and took him to New York City. By this point, his mother had gotten a job and wanted her son back. Stanley Carter grew up to be a member of the prestigious Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division, or SHIELD for short. He volunteered to be a part of their drug experimentations. The experiments aimed to create a super soldier similar to Captain America, the first successful superhuman created through drug experiments. The drug experiments that Stanley Carter was subjected to aimed to increase the strength and stamina of the user, but it had unforeseen side effects. The drugs drove Stanley Carter insane, and the project was scrapped because it was deemed too dangerous. Stanley thought there was a blatant abuse of power and immediately submitted his resignation. The drugs were flushed entirely out of his system, but they had already done the damage. Marvelous story arcs of Stanley Carter, aka Sin Eater. So remember when we told you that the Sin Eater had a few fantastic stories back in the day? Well, now is the time to take a look at some of the marvelous story arcs that Stanley Carter, also known as the Sin Eater, has been a part of. How was the Sin Eater born? After his resignation from SHIELD, Stanley Carter became a part of the law enforcement department. He became a detective in the New York Police Department and was assigned to a partner. He caught his partner being involved in drugs and took the law into his own hands. Without giving a second thought to his actions, Stanley murdered his partner, but his mind repressed the episode, and he remembered the incident as his partner is killed in a police shootout. He goes on a killing spree, hunting down all the drug-related criminals in the city. The incident was still the trigger point for Stanley Carter, who decided that the sin-filled world needed cleansing, and that it was his calling as a Sin Eater to take on the sins of the world and purge the world of evil. He got a shotgun and a few clothes to improvise a costume. It kind of reminds us of Spider-Man creating his costume, except for the shotgun. Thus, the Soul Eater was born to punish the sinners who abused their authority and powers. The Sin Eater's first victim was his lover and a captain of the New York Police Department, Jean DeWolf. Her death caused ripples across the city, as she was a close friend of Spider-Man, having worked with him to solve a few cases, and a sister of Brian DeWolf, the costume vigilante known as the Wraith. Wraith. Funnily enough, Stanley Carter was assigned to the case to investigate the murder of Jean DeWolf. He started working with Spider-Man to solve the murder, which he committed himself. It looks like the Sin Eater has a tendency to choose friends of superheroes to murder, because his next victim was Judge Horace Rosenthal, a close friend of Matt Murdock, also known as Daredevil. After committing the crime, he fled the scene when a confrontation with Spider-Man seemed imminent. When Spider-Man was distracted upon seeing his Aunt May in the crowd, the Sin Eater used the chance to escape. The third victim of the Sin Eater, Reverend Bernard Finn, caused a huge public uproar. The Sin Eater was apprehended at the office of the Daily Bugle. It was apparent that the Sin Eater's next victim was J. Jonah Jameson, but the apprehended Sin Eater turned out to be a copycat who was Stanley Carter's neighbor. After Daredevil confirmed that the Sin Eater they caught was a fake, Spider-Man, along with Daredevil, rushed to the house of J. Jonah Jameson. They managed to stop the Sin Eater before he could harm Betty Brant Leeds, who is J. Jonah Jameson's secretary, and his wife, Marla Jameson. After the Sin Eater was unmasked and revealed to be Stanley Carter, Spider-Man felt betrayed by him. He beat Stanley Carter to an inch within his life and would have ended up killing him if Daredevil had not pulled him off. Stanley Carter was judged and sentenced to a mental institution as he was mentally unstable. The public was enraged at the not guilty verdict and believed that the cops were trying to protect one of their own men. They demanded justice, which made it challenging to transport Stanley Carter to a secure facility. Despite Daredevil's attempts to convince the crowd, he had to bring over the angry Spider-Man to transport Stanley Carter safely. They successfully separated the Sin Eater persona and Stanley Carter at the mental hospital so that only one personality can control the body at a time. Stanley Carter ended up in a constant struggle to keep control of his body. In a final attempt to get rid of the Sin Eater personality, he threatened the cops with his signature shotgun, forcing the police to open fire on him. After the death of Stanley Carter, it is revealed that the shotgun was not loaded. It appears that Stanley Carter successfully got rid of the Sin Eater from the world. The Rising of the Sin. As mentioned previously, the Sin Eater was brought back from the grave to become a Spider-Man villain once again. While he was being punished for his sins in hell, Stanley Carter was brought back to Earth by Sarah Stacy and Gabriel Stacy, who was known as the Kindred Twins. The demonic entities sought revenge against Spider-Man and decided to unleash the Sin Eater onto the Earth. The Kindred Twins sent the Sin Eater after supervillains and criminals to cleanse their sins and reform them. The brutal Sin Eater went after the criminals with an intensity that worried Spider-Man. He tried to stop the vigilante, but he failed to do so. The public approved of Sin Eater's methods, which resulted in the Sin Eater gaining a huge number of followers. He used these followers to attack his next target at the Ravencroft Institute, Norman Osborn. Spider-Man and Norman Osborn teamed up to fend off the attacking hordes of Sin Eater followers. They managed to escape with the help of the Order of the Web, but Norman Osborn's actions led him to be left at the mercy of the Sin Eater. After his cleansing of Norman Osborn, one of the Kindred Twins, Gabriel, arrives and reminds the Sin Eater of his crime of murdering his partner when he was a detective. The Sin Eater breaks down and is attacked by the various sins that he had absorbed until that point. His followers found him in the basement of the Ravencroft Institute. Then, the Sin Eater decided that his abandonment by the Kindred Twins was a test and decided to hunt down the members of the Order of the Web who were possessed by the evil spirits formed out of the sins that the Sin Eater had absorbed. After he realizes that Gabriel is deceiving him, the Sin Eater uses his shotgun to take his own life, but he did not achieve peace as the Kindred Twins reanimated him as a zombie in their fight against Spider-Man, in which they pitted the friendly neighborhood superhero against an army of supervillains. His hands were blown off during the fight when Spider-Man used his web shooters to block the muzzle of his shotgun. The Sin Eater was freed from the demonic entity's control by Dr. Octopus, but he was not seen afterward. Other characters who claimed to be Sin Eater. There have been other characters that have claimed to be the Sin Eater themselves. These people, who are usually mentally deranged, claim that they are the sin-eating supervillain. Let us explore these characters and their motivations behind such claims. Emil Gregg, the psychotic neighbor of Stanley Carter that tried to assassinate J. Jonah Jameson in the office of the Daily Bugle. Emil Gregg declared that he had heard voices in his head that instructed him to murder the news reporter. But in reality, Emil Gregg overheard the actual Sin Eater, Stanley Carter, detailing his plans through the thin walls of his apartment. Emil Gregg's impersonation as the Sin Eater cost Eddie Brock his career in journalism, as he had published a series of articles based on Emil Gregg being the Sin Eater. During the Absolute Carnage storyline, Emil Gregg is reanimated as a zombie-like creature and let loose in New York City. Emil Gregg kidnaps a few children while wearing a costume that is similar to the original Sin Eater costume. He planned to sacrifice these children in honor of the symbiotic god, Null. Yep, it is confirmed. Emil Gregg was a certified lunatic who should have been in a mental asylum. Michael G. Inglesworth, another lunatic who decided to claim to be the Sin Eater after hearing the delusions of one. Michael G. Inglesworth was a veteran soldier who took part in the Gulf War and was bunkmates with Emil Gregg at a shelter for the homeless in the city. He decided to emulate the delusions of the Sin Eater he heard Emil Gregg mumbling about. Michael G. G. Inglesworth shows up on the stairs at the courthouse and starts killing people off. During his killing spree, he injures Annie Wang, who was an old flame of Eddie Brock, who was the host of Venom. Michael G. Inglesworth shows up at the hospital to finish off his victim, but Venom was there to stop him. Michael G. Inglesworth went on his murderous path until he was shot in the back by another lunatic carrying a shotgun. He became a suicide bomber when he realized he was dying. Despite the lack of superpowers and abilities, Michael G. Inglesworth was able to give Venom and the cops the slip and terrorize the city. What makes Sin Eater so powerful? The Sin Eater was an extremely tricky opponent to deal with because of the abilities and powers he possessed. Before he was resurrected by the Kindred twins, Stanley Carter, as the Sin Eater, possessed slightly enhanced strength and stamina, which he got thanks to the experimentations he was subjected to at S.H.I.E.L.D. Although the experiments did not make him Captain America, they did drive him crazy. The military-trained Stanley Carter was an expert marksman and a skilled hand-to-hand combat fighter. His preferred weapon of choice was a double-barreled shotgun, which he used to take down all of his enemies. After his resurrection, Sin Eater's shotgun underwent a change. The gun was now capable of rendering any of his opponent's superpowers obsolete and cleansing them their sins. He also had the ability to create evil spirits out of the sins he absorbed and utilize the powers of his enemies he took down. The Sin Eater can be seen using powers such as technopathy and vehicle alteration, ionic abilities, petrifying touch, laser projection, rotation, and wind-based abilities, corruption touch, and empowerment, which were all powers of the enemies he defeated. Sin Eater appearances and other media. The Sin Eater has made appearances in television shows, such as The Spectacular Spider-Man, in which he appears as Stan Carter, a uniformed police officer who is in favor of the web-slinging Spider-Man's efforts to keep New York City safe. Another version of the Sin Eater also appears in the novel Spider-Man Requiem by Jeff Marriott. In the novel, Stan Carter is resurrected by the Carrion, a supervillain, to fight against Spider-Man. Marvelous Verdict. A sin-obsessed maniac who believes he is a sin himself. The Sin Eater is a villain that has a tragic upbringing and a horrible life. His twisted sense of justice makes him believe that he is carrying out justice, when in reality, he is just murdering people in cold blood. The actions of the Sin Eater bring out the extreme rage in our beloved web-slinging superhero, Spider-Man, and that was interesting to witness. The Sin Eater is definitely a supervillain that we need to watch out for, not just because of his background, but because of his abilities and skills too. And the icing on the cake is that he is insane as well. What more could you ask for in a supervillain? And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.